Hello, I'm Dave Eicher, editor of Astronomy magazine. Welcome to the 9th Cosmos Rewind Google Hangout sponsored by Celestron Telescopes. This past episode of Cosmos, a SpaceTime Odyssey, was called The Lost Worlds of Planet Earth. It featured the history of our planet and life on it, starting 350 million years ago. And I'm here again joined by a number of our editors from Astronomy and Discover magazines. Great to have you all. Let me introduce the panel before we get going here. Corey Powell, editor-at-large of Discover. Corey, as always, great to have you, and you've had an adventurous day here.
Yeah, I just did a mad sprint to be here, but which is, it's funny. It's a virtual event. We're sort of nowhere, but actually being physically right here turned out to be important. So, I gave a little extra run for science.
Well, thank you, and we're delighted to have you as always. Carrie Farron, production editor of Astronomy. Great to have you back, Carrie. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm ready to talk about Earth's history.
That's a good thing. And senior editor of Astronomy, Rich Talcott. Great to have you back as well, Rich. Call Rich the doctor because he knows pretty much everything. How are you doing today, Rich?
I'm doing well. Looking forward to hearing about the planet Earth.
No.
Sorry.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us. And before we get rolling on a lot of things to talk about that we'll enjoy, because remember, Earth is a planet too, as the old saying goes, Carrie is going to give us an episode summary. Take it away, Carrie.
All right. It's kind of long, but that's partially because I really like this episode, so here goes. We opened with a model of Earth as it was 350 million years ago. Neil deGrasse Tyson explains that, quote, the past is another planet, one where there was more oxygen in the atmosphere than at any other time in Earth's history, and the planet was home to some really big insects, and thank goodness they didn't attack Neil as they were walking or crawling by. It was also a time of the first trees, which were unfamiliar to Earth's fungi, so when the trees died, they didn't decay. Welcome to the beginning of the third great extinction. So we visit Cosmos' Hall of Extinction, and it depicts the end of the Permian world with volcanic eruptions that lasted hundreds of thousands of years, coal smoke, sulfuric acid haze, and massive global warming. Lovely place to be. It was the most treacherous period in the history of life, wiping out more than 80% of species, and it came to be known as the Great Dying. It was amazing to see how close we came to not existing a quarter of a billion years ago. But our ancestors survived, and next we jump to 220 million years ago, a time when the Atlantic Ocean first came into existence due to changes deep beneath Earth. But then we quickly flash forward to 1517 and the first modern world atlas. The creator, Ortelius, noticed that the Americas look like they fit with North Africa in kind of a jigsaw puzzle. But no one took the idea seriously until the early 1900s and Alfred Wegener. He didn't believe the land bridges hypothesis to explain how some plant and dinosaur fossils could be found on either side of the Atlantic. And he was studying the mountain formations, similar rock layers, tropical plants in the Arctic, etc., and concluded that there once was a supercontinent, which he called Pangaea. Most geologists ridiculed the idea of continental drift at the time, though, and Wegener unfortunately died on an expedition, never knowing he was right. But enter Marie Tharp in 1952. Based on grad student Bruce Heasen's work mapping the ocean floor using sonar, Tharp discovered a giant rift valley in the Atlantic, supporting the idea of continental drift. This girl talk didn't gain any traction, though, until years later when Tharp overlaid an oceanic earthquake epicenter map with the seafloor map, and the earthquakes fell right along the rift valley. So the ship of the imagination decides then to take us on a journey to this Atlantic mid-ocean ridge where few humans have ever ventured. Less than have even ventured to the moon. Below 1,000 meters, it's a world of no sunlight, but it's not completely dark thanks to bioluminescence. We learn that life survives at these depths thanks to chemosynthesis, and Neil notes that the past is another planet, but most don't even know this one, which is very true. He points out that our sense of the stability of Earth is an illusion based on the shortness of our lives. in truth, we live on a crust of a seething cauldron. Neil shows us how an earthquake occurs, and then we witness a time-lapse animation of Earth changing, stopping at 2 million years ago. The Triassic extinction, although the episode really doesn't touch on that one very much. Since the Triassic extinction, though, then the dinosaurs had a good run of 170 million years, although they didn't show any, sad face. But the knockout punch for the most recent extinction came out of the blue. Few species more than 100 pounds survived the KT impact that occurred roughly 65 million years ago. Those that did were buried underground, and Earth became the planet of the mammals. Next, we're going to jump in time again to 5.3 million years ago and the formation of the Mediterranean Sea when Atlantic Ocean waters breached the Strait of Gibraltar, sending massive flood into the basin. And meanwhile, we see North and South America come together via tectonic forces to create the Isthmus of Panama. This changed worldwide ocean currents, which affected the global climate, including reducing the lush vegetation in Africa to grasslands and deserts. And we touch base with our ancestors who went from the trees to the ground and learned to walk upright. As Neil states, Earth has shaped the course of human destiny. But so has the pull of distant worlds like Venus and Jupiter. Their gravitational influences, we see their gravitational influencing causing Earth's tilt and orbit to change over time, temporarily changing the sunlight hitting Earth's polar ice cap. We visit several glacial periods during the most recent ice age, including a time 15 to 25,000 years ago when the ice receded and exposed a land bridge to North America from Asia. These final manic swings of climate and sea level changes ended 10,000 years ago, and we begin a gentler climate age. But then there's us. Thanks to our evolution, we're impacting climate change now. Neil points out that we just can't stop our addiction to burning those ancient trees as coal or the remains of ancient life in the form of oil and gas. In a line that was literally all over social media on Sunday night, during the episode, Neil says, "The dinosaurs never saw that asteroid coming. What's our excuse?" Finally, we take a peek into the future, but because plate tectonics, gravitational influences, small bodies, and many other factors don't care about life, what happens to life on this planet is an unknown. And we end back in the halls of extinction, where we encounter a sixth area that's unlabeled, our area. And Neil concludes, what happens in our hall in countless ways is being written by us. Dramatic ending.
Dun, dun, dun!
Exactly.
Then the music comes.
So that's it.
Thanks, Carrie. What did you all think of this episode? I thought it was a good episode. It was well structured. There was a lot of good science, planetary science. And again, we don't have a lot of deep galactic and extragalactic astronomy coming yet, which is a little surprising in the overall architecture of this show. But it's a really good episode on our planet Earth, wasn't it?
I'd say I loved the material. I found the organization of it actually a little tough to follow because it made all these chronological leaps but didn't do them in quite a linear style. And so, as I was watching, even knowing some of the backstory on these things, I kept thinking to myself, now wait a second, which period are we in and which extinction are we talking about here? So I don't know. I'd be curious to hear how people coming from a non-scientific background felt about the episode. There were some touches that I really liked, including one at the very beginning when Neil Tyson describes the giant insects and insect-like creatures that lived back in the Permian and earlier. These big giant CGI millipede walks by, and he describes a millipede the size of a crocodile, which on the face of it is sort of hard to absorb. And then this Arthropleura walks by, and Arthropleura was in fact a millipede that lived during the Carboniferous period, and the largest fossil is about 6 feet long. So I went and checked, and I thought, well, that's about crocodile size. And then it walks right by, and he sort of dances around while it's on screen. I thought that was a very nice touch in sort of making you realize that these things that you sometimes you see in science fiction movies, or maybe you see them in museum dioramas, but they were real. They lived, and if you had been around back then, you would have had to do quite a dance to get over this thing. Fortunately, it's a vegetarian.
Well, as someone that doesn't like to dance, I'm happy I didn't have to dance out of the way of those guys either. I certainly liked the episode, but getting back a little bit to what Dave said, for a show called Cosmos and with 4 episodes left, I'm waiting for us to get a little bit beyond our home planet and out more into the cosmos and talk about galaxies and the universe in general, which I'm still holding out hope we're going to do in quite a bit of detail, but I'm looking forward to that part.
No, I really liked the episode. I mean, I agree. We seem to be, you know, very kind of Earth-centric, but at the same time, Earth is a planet too. It is part of astronomy, and I kind of really always enjoyed Earth science growing up and learning about the different, you know, periods of life and extinction and the different species that existed many millions of years ago. I loved that intro with the giant insects. This episode also had a lot of kind of sentimental parts, and I was checking on social media as I was watching, and I was live tweeting, and there were a lot of people that felt the same way, that there were a lot of touching moments, you know, showing how eventually, you know, how this all impacts us. There was the montage with a lot of faces towards the end, and how, you know, everything that's happened up to this point affects where we are today. And then they used something that I really love, which is time lapses. There were multiple time lapses where they showed, you know, ground glacier movement that you don't see on us, you know, watching live. I love that seeing, you know, how active Earth is. I agree there was some disjointedness. I watched it live, and since I was live tweeting, I couldn't kind of do anything, but I went back, and I actually had to rewind because they skipped over the Triassic extinction so quickly. They literally spent 30 seconds on it, and all of a sudden we were talking about the KT impact, and I was like, well, what happened? And so that was a little... I'd always like Corey said, remind myself where we were in the story of Earth's history. But it was really well done. The only thing I think they could have done to grab a few other people is, I mean, I know you don't want to always focus on dinosaurs because there are plenty of stuff about dinosaurs, but literally there was one sentence about dinosaurs, and I would have liked to see a dinosaur. Instead, we saw a bridge.
Well, I mean, back to Dave's question about why we didn't see more Cosmos in Cosmos. I thought what this episode did and did very well is it reinforced this message that we are a part of the universe. That you cannot separate out there and down here. That there's a whole series of contingencies starting from the Big Bang and nucleosynthesis that made elements, and then the first stars, and then a series of supernovas that sort of made the elements that we're made of, and then we have this planet we're sitting on. This tremendous heat engine that has plate tectonics and that has volcanic activity and has all these impacts going on from the inside and forcing from the outside. Just subtle changes in the amount of sunlight that we get also can radically change the climate. And that all of these contingencies, if they didn't come out just the way that they did, you wouldn't have the Earth, you wouldn't have had the sequence of events that you had, you wouldn't have had the type of life that we had, and that we are the for us, very fortunate, for a lot of other species, not so fortunate outcome of this process. That if the dinosaurs did not meet their demise, who's to say what the planet would look like now? And I think the point is, we focus so much on that one extinction, but there have been many, many extinctions in the history of the Earth, and actually that's something maybe we'll talk about a little bit more. The show talked about 5 great extinctions, and that's the way that evolutionary biologists commonly talk about it. But the 5 great extinctions are 5 great extinctions during the well-preserved fossil record of the past 500 million years. But we know that life on Earth has been here for something closer to 3.5 billion years. So there's a previous 3 billion years when probably the assaults on life were probably even greater than they were in modern times. The Earth was hotter, it was more volcanic. The sun was younger and more unstable. There were more asteroid impacts. There was more debris in the solar system. This system hadn't settled down quite as far. So it's reasonable to assume that, if there are 5 mass extinctions in the past 500 million years, there have probably been 50 or maybe 100 comparable assaults on the history of life since the beginning. And to me, that's another great theme of the show, which is that so much of the universe, even now, is still invisible to us. A lot of the history of the Earth is still invisible to us. We really do not know. There were some sort of microbial extinctions going on. There was something happening that let life get from there to here. And honestly, we have no idea what it is. I'd say probably a good 80 to 90% of the history of life on Earth is still largely a blank slate.
Well, that's right. There were certainly a lot of other mass extinctions. We know about those 5, but you're absolutely right, Corey, because the resurfacing and other processes on Earth hide most of our history. So there were many, many of them, and especially, presumably, if you believe in what we know about how life originated on Earth, there were many sort of disasters that snuffed out life, and it restarted again very early on. Even apart from the big discrete mass extinctions that we talk about, like the big 5 that we know about that are relatively recent. So that's absolutely right. And I also thought, just stepping back to the Carboniferous for 1 second, because that was sort of always a fascinating thing to me, visiting, you mentioned it, Corey, visiting museums, and you saw these, giant insect dioramas. There was nothing that was cooler, for a kid than seeing those things for a while. Well, that was, 360 to 300 million years ago, roughly. And I thought it was interesting, this business about how life evolved in different ways at different times. It led to explosive changes later on. I thought it was interesting how Neil talked about this richness of oxygen at the time in the Carboniferous and the development of trees, and the fact that plants had been around for quite some time, but then this compound lignin, which is a carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. It's C31H34O11. It's a polymer of aromatic alcohols that just happened to get going and survive in that way because it was very difficult to eat for predators to eat, and that led to this explosion of much taller plants of trees that were undergoing photosynthesis shooting up above the predators, and that led to another major direction in the evolution of life. So it's really, it gets back to what you just said, Corey. There's so many puzzles that are all interrelated of the way things have gone here on Earth, and one big turn in the road leads to a whole lot of stuff. Whether it's the development of trees or whether by all rights, had it not been for the KPG impactor, dinosaurs should still be here, dominant, and mammals wouldn't have developed presumably the way they did. So it is a fascinating story, and it is the best planet we have to create a story for. So it's not non-astronomical, but I think we do eventually want to get to dark matter and dark energy and the size and age and fate of the universe and all that good stuff.
Hey, what if we call them dark extinctions? Will that make you feel better?
Yes, that's good. I like that. And they are fascinating stories. I mean, everyone talks about the dinosaur killer, but the great, the end Permian, which killed off, 97% of species, is it?
Yes, it's 83. It's 83% of genia.
Okay, and I think you've actually got a graphic.
I do.
Gary, that shows us, while we're talking about the major extinctions, we've got sort of a graphic that you have of the 5 big ones that we can look at.
This actually appeared in Astronomy magazine, and this is once again showing the connection. This actually appeared in Astronomy magazine before I was here, but it was in November of 2005, and it shows, a percent. I mean, you compare it. We know a lot about the KT extinction because it was most recent of the 5 great extinctions. But I mean, if you look at that.
Those are genera that are shown there, but the end Permian, it actually killed off, what is it here? Well, 90 to 96% of all species that were on the planet at the time. So that was a big bad day, on Earth. The other thing is there are leads. Obviously we believe we know about the KPG impact, the end Cretaceous, the dinosaur killer. There's abundant evidence, of course, for that, geologically and astronomically. But the causes for the other four, although there are good ideas that you can read about, they're not really definitively known. What caused these, including the end Permian. There are multiple possible causes, and so it's not a story that's completely comfortably well known yet.
Right, and there's also a flip side that there have been multiple large impacts, including some impacts that seemed like they were as large as the one that occurred at the end of the age of the dinosaurs, but for whatever reason are not associated with anything like a comparable mass extinction. So, did that particular asteroid hit in a particularly bad location at a particularly bad time? That's actually the standard narrative, that it happened to hit in the Yucatan, a place where the rock liberated a lot of noxious gas, that happened to occur around the same time as a continental rearrangement and as a massive volcanic eruption in India. So maybe it is just occasionally, just by coincidence, 2 or 3 things line up at the same time, and that's when life really takes a hit. But we don't know. It's hard to distinguish something where people are making essentially just so stories, trying to justify their theory, versus when you're actually seeing just random events happen to cluster at the right time, and that's when the extinctions happen.
Yeah, and I think the extinction, particularly at the end of the KT event, are ones that tend to affect larger animals and such more than the smaller ones. And obviously with the dinosaurs around and a lot of those being large, that had a disproportionate impact on them. So I think that may be part of the reason too why that one led to such a large extinction.
Yeah, and I did think it was very interesting because, as we saw, they barely touched, we didn't even deal with the oldest 2 of the 5 great extinctions. We started at the 3rd, but we spent a lot, and I know it was obviously the biggest, as they say, life-altering, the most death that Earth had seen in, that we know of in this 500 million years. But, they really showed only a, short amount of impact of the KT impact, which we know the most about. They completely glossed over the Triassic extinction because we don't know a lot about, but they seem to put a great amount of detail in what happened in, during the Permian extinction, but at the same time, as Corey, you state, we really don't know for sure. I didn't know if it was maybe a little too misleading to say, because it seemed kind of like Neil was saying, like, gospel truth, this is exactly what happened, when...
Yeah, I thought it was overstated as far as causation. There's no question about that, but again, there's a very limited amount of time they have just to try to see it from the standpoint of the scriptwriter, but it's certainly not a clearly understood set of causes. That's true.
Yeah, and then basically what you have most evolutionary geologists and biologists say is that there was always, like, resulted from a combination of environmental and biological reasons, but then there was always just one event that kind of tipped the scale towards extinction, and then they kind of, and this is where they started with the volcanism for the Permian, because the best theories say, huge periods of volcanic activity caused that one, and that likely an asteroid caused the KT1. There's even, for one we didn't get to talk about, which would have been fun, they think maybe a gamma ray burst might have had an impact. So it's just kind of, there's always multiple layers of it, and then they think there's that one event that tips the scale.
This will keep geologists, geochemists, biologists, paleontologists employed for a while yet, we can hope. Let's switch gears, if we can, a minute here and talk about Marie Tharp, because I think the question of the week from people, did they really treat Marie Tharp that way? That's horrible.
The sad answer is yes. So just a little bit of background. So Marie Tharp was working at Columbia with Bruce. It turns out he pronounces his name Hazen, even though Neil Tyson called him Heezen through the whole episode. She was working with Bruce Hazen, and although he was nominally her superior and the lead researcher on the team, Marie Tharp was really the one who was doing the most innovative work in putting together all these different bits of data about what the bottom of the ocean looks like. And it's, again, it's hard to remember. This is not so long ago. This is just in the 40s and 50s. People really did not understand that the ocean bottom was an interesting place. The prevailing view at the time was that the continents have all the interesting topography and all the interesting geology, and the ocean bottom is basically a big flat layer of mush with water on top of it. There really isn't much of interest there. And so Marie Tharp was one of the first people who was really putting together a detailed picture of what is down there. And in the process, she discovered what we now call the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and she discovered some of the crucial evidence for understanding basically how continental drift works, how plate tectonics works, how continents move. But to that question, how was she treated? Well, first of all, she was not allowed to go onto any of the ocean-going vessels because that was considered an inappropriate place for a woman. So she had to basically take on the clerical side of the work because she was not allowed to set foot on a ship. And then Bruce Hazen, like most people at the time, really not only didn't believe in continental drift, really sort of treated it like it was voodoo or astrology, that this was crazy stuff, and you don't even want to say those words. So when Marie Tharp starts saying, I'm seeing this thing, it looks like a mountain range in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and it looks like the kind of thing that happens in places where land pulls apart. Both in his account and in her account, he actually told her, this sounds like a bunch of girl talk. You don't want to go around saying that. People are just gonna make fun of you. And I mean, I think Cosmos did slightly over dramatize it, because in Marie Tharp's account, basically, she kept on him for about a year, and after about a year of her showing him all these different types of data, he finally relented and said, okay, you might be onto something. Well, the interesting thing is, he never believed in continental drift. He believed in the expanding Earth theory, that the whole Earth was expanding and stretching. I think it wasn't until really the very end of his life in the 70s that he finally accepted that, in fact, she was right. So, but the interesting thing is, you can go online and read Marie Tharp's autobiography. She created a company that still exists called Marie Tharp Maps, and she has a whole biography posted there. And it's a very, very gentle account. She harbors no grudges. It's not bitter. She says, I worked in the background. I didn't get much acclaim, and that's fine. So, it makes what she did in some ways all the more impressive.
It really is. I mean, the astonishing thing about this, though, I mean, this happened in the 1940s. This treatment of her, this is not exactly ancient history. It's almost ridiculous, some of the attitudes that she had to wade through, in a post-World War II society at Columbia. They're being an extremely liberal intellectual institution there. I mean, how does that carry? Is there anything you want to say on behalf of?
On behalf of women.
The women.
Yeah, on behalf of all women.
Yeah, can you speak for the women of the world? What do women think?
What do women think? I think it's a good reminder, as you say, to remind people how recent the attitudes have started to change and are still in the process of changing. I mean, it's not over yet necessarily of pure equality, but it's these stories. I mean, I enjoy hearing them. I could say it would be frustrating to say, yeah, it took that long for women, and it was, but at the same time, sometimes I think even just, and I don't know if it's good or bad, it's like for like my cousin's kids, my niece is too young to realize this yet, but my cousin's kids to not really think anything of a time when men and women were not treated equally in the workplace, and how recent that was, that just, my mom faced that. Not just even still having challenges in the workplace, and so did my grandparents. But it's kind of like that. I'm that back and forth. Am I glad that they don't have to worry about that anymore? Yes, but do I sometimes wish that it's reminded how recently that's changed? Yes.
Okay, let's go on to talk about some less controversial things.
Oh, yeah.
How about climate change and global warming? Because there's absolutely no doubt, and if you don't like it for whatever reasons, then we'll agree to disagree, but virtually all credible scientists who are working on this problem, earth scientists, geologists, geochemists, astronomers, physicists, right on down the line, there's clear evidence that a copious amount of carbon dioxide production is producing a big problem on our planet. There's no doubt about it. Human-driven global warming is a fact. And it may take some people to catch up, some time to catch up on this. Some folks are still working on evolution, and that was breaking news in 1859. But how do you think this episode, which really did so at the end, portrayed global warming? And was it nuanced, or did they step on the accelerator enough? They talked about the empty corridor in the Hall of Extinction and where we might be going. How do you think the TV show treated this subject, given that it is, especially in the United States, for strange and non-understandable reasons, still very controversial, and given the fact that the show was airing on, ironically enough, on Fox? What's your reaction to the treatment of global warming and climate change in this episode?
I thought it was pretty good myself. The one thing that struck me as a little bit odd is that in the Hall of Extinction, he seemed to be implying that humans in the future, because of what we're doing to the climate, may increase the number of species that go extinct, and made no mention, that I recall at least, of all these species that have died out because of human intervention over the last couple of hundred years. For instance, it's hard for the passenger pigeon to adapt to guns and things like that. So I thought that was kind of odd that he put all of his eggs in the Hall of Extinction into that one basket and didn't talk a little bit more about all the kinds of effects that humans are having on our planet.
So I think I had sort of a split reaction. I mean, I think the part that I really appreciated was Cosmos was able to put this in a context that other shows, and especially other news shows, can't. Which is, Neil Tyson was talking about climate change in this this context of very, very deep time. So he sort of introduced it as kind of the latest instance of life creating its own circumstances. That trees evolved. They evolved lignin. They developed trunks. Biomass of trees piled up before there was anything that could digest it and destroy it. And so you got these enormous coal beds. And then you had volcanism in Siberia that hit those coal beds, and that had a huge catastrophic environmental impact. This idea that that life is a dynamic process in which life affects other life. And then in that context, here's that coal that at the end of the Permian got hit with volcanic heat and caused dire environmental consequences. That same coal is now being hit by human activity with dire environmental consequences. I thought that was an interesting context to put it in. That humans are one more force on this planet, and we may have dire effects just as life has had dire effects on the planet in the past. The part that I thought they actually could have hit more clearly and more dynamically is really exactly what those impacts are right now. That really put, when you talked about creating more heat than there has been since the time of the dinosaurs. The fact that we really, we're in the middle of that right now. This is, it's not a theoretical thing. It's something that we're dealing with at the moment. There's a report that just came out today, the National Climate Assessment, which is, I encourage people to read it. It's a pretty sobering document. It's about the effects, that we're seeing a change in climate right now, and there are going to be some very expensive and some very complicated consequences. Cities are going to have to build seawalls. We're going to have to change, maybe re-engineer our crops and re-engineer our livestock, or change the areas where we do arable land. I mean, there are huge consequences to these things, and I think the reason people don't want to deal with climate change is that they think, oh well, any kind of reaction to climate change is going to be expensive and inconvenient, and it's going to increase government control, and there are all these reasons that people don't like to wrap their heads around it. But then you think about the consequences of not doing anything about it. It is going to be expensive. It's going to be disruptive. It's going to involve huge government-funded programs in order to deal with the changes. It's not like sitting back and ignoring it is going to save you from the problems.
Yeah, you mentioned the National Climate Assessment, which I did skim when it came out today, and I found it very interesting that it came out today, and something that a lot of viewers don't know because it's not widely publicized. You just see the order that Fox is releasing, National Geographic Channel is releasing these episodes to you, and technically, in the order of what the producers of Cosmos put in their line of order, we are out of order. This episode was supposed to air next, and the episode that will air next week was supposed to air this week, based on their order of this is episode 1, 2, 3. So per Fox, this was episode 9, but per the Cosmos producers, this was episode 10. And the media knows that, and then the producers shared that with us. And I don't know if it's an interesting coincidence that the climate one got pushed up a week, but kind of interesting that it all of a sudden you've got people, they just aired an episode about, that involves climate change and our impact on climate change, and, have people talking, and then this National Climate Assessment comes out this morning. And, it's quite the assessment. It's very sobering. That effects of human-induced climate change are being felt in every corner of the United States. And when it comes to emissions, we were off. The United States was often in first, and only recently has been overpassed by China, but we're still in second. And that the warming could conceivably exceed 10 degrees by the end of the century is what this paper said, that it's already been 2 degrees Fahrenheit in the past century, and that it could be up to 10 degrees by the end of the century. And so I was, reading it, and I'm going, well, of course. And then I'm trying not to get too political, but there was a response that came out, and I don't know if you guys, from the committee, the chairman of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, Lamar Smith, basically bashing it. And kind of me sitting back going, oh God, this is the committee chairman on Science, Space, and Technology bashing this National Climate Assessment, which has been required to be done multiple different, it's supposed to have been done every 4 years, but even Bill Clinton and they were slow to get on it, so this is only the third one, saying this is just totally Obama's political agenda, and that it's completely political and has nothing to do with science. And it was tough to read. If you want to read the statement, it's right on the Committee of Space Science and Technology website.
Well, I think it gets back to that issue that, a lot of the, I mean, Cosmos is setting out to try to improve science literacy, and I think one of the ways that the show is working this, which is quite clever, is approaching everything from sort of the big idea themes of our connectedness to the universe, the connectedness of life, a view of the universe as large rather than small, and look, I hope that's a successful approach. That encouraging people to think about why scientists do this. That the role that scientists are not out to do this to create giant government bureaucracies, and they're not out to do this to get rich and get grants. Scientists fundamentally do this because they are incredibly curious people, and curiosity is this very deeply ingrained and very sort of unstoppable human trait. And I think to the extent that people absorb that and accept that, I think that's got to help the sort of the larger cause of looking at the world rationally. We live in a universe, a hostile universe. We live on this planet that's one little oasis where conditions are just right for us, but in a precarious way, in a way that has tipped and tilted many times in the past. And the message that I take from the fact that it's tipped and tilted many times in the past is that life is going to go on, but not necessarily our kind of life, and not necessarily a life that we enjoy. If you want to preserve the planet in this current state, that actually requires some very specific kind of caretaking. And this idea that Earth has seen mass extinctions before and climate has changed in the past. Why are we worried about it? I'm like, why are we worried about it? Things went extinct. Yes, I mean the planet is going to keep going on, but do we really want a planet where all human beings are gone? Like, is that considered a viable alternative? It just, like I said, I hope that that sort of big picture cosmos perspective actually helps people step back a little bit and think about, that there's an existential battle for survival here that's much bigger than the battle over, do I have to pay a tax on my gasoline? And I don't want government getting involved in some program with where there's they can't control, where they want to try to control who burns coal. There are much bigger issues at stake here. Sorry, I didn't mean to use my funny voice.
No, that was good, and we have to try to convince people of this, all in an age when long-term planning in many people's minds is a week from Thursday, rather than 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 or a million years from now, when things could be radically, fundamentally different on this planet. When most people are concerned really about themselves right now, that's it's tough sledding to get people to understand this and to take care of this planet, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing to me, and I guess the only explanation I can have is people being obsessed with the here and now and not thinking long term, is that you have this Russia, you have this meteor impact breakup over Russia, and there's all this, well, how do we prevent this? This could cause huge problems for Earth, and everyone, was really obsessed with that because that, KT impact was an extinction. It can cause an extinction of species on Earth, but at the same time, other causes for potential problems, like climate change, get poo-pooed. But once again, it's because the only reason I can think of, and I don't understand. Whereas I say, we can control a lot more about, what we're doing on Earth versus a random asteroid or comet impact. We can control what's happening on Earth. A lot of people think, well, or I assume because I don't understand, the possible climate change, that's, slow, and whereas an asteroid could hit us tomorrow is kind of, I don't know if that's the thinking, like that affects me, not future generations, that affects me. But I guess I don't understand it because to me you can control or have an impact on this kind of threat versus deflecting an asteroid. I just don't know.
Well, I mean, this is a place where I think, to some extent, we are victims of our own evolutionary legacy. There is no species that engages in long-term planning of hundreds or thousands of years and imagines a future that way, other than human beings. And even the ability of human beings to imagine a world 10 or 100 or 1,000 years in the future, even that is a relatively recent occurrence. So I think it's not that perspective is not really hardwired into us. And I think to some extent this is a question of whether we can transcend our evolutionary origins. If we think like reptiles, then we don't do anything about climate change, and we just sort of take wherever things go. The question is, can we think like humans? Can we think like something that is that transcends our evolutionary roots and actually take control of what we're doing, take responsibility for what we're doing, and figure out how to look out for our own interests. And to me, that's that's the hardest message to convey, is that confronting global warming is looking out for our own interests, and denying it is basically denying our own interests. And the fact that the conversation has gotten flipped around, that that dealing with global warming is going to be harmful and ignoring it is somehow the economically beneficial thing to do, that I think that's really the crux of where the conversation has to change before people are really going to embrace a different course of action.
Corey, are you saying that politicians in Washington may have the intellectual capability to outplan reptiles?
Well, velociraptors, by some accounts, were pretty intelligent. So I just want them to do a little bit better than, I don't know, Triceratops, maybe Ankylosaurus. Definitely, how about better than a Diplodocus? It's really. We'll start by setting the bar low, and then we'll, in our geeky way, we'll try to set up our evolutionary expectations for our elected representatives.
Well, the crocodiles have survived for 100 million years, so maybe we can learn something from keeping our heads low and letting things wash over us.
Yeah. Let's talk briefly about another interesting character here in history, and that's Abraham Ortelius. He was an interesting guy who came along and created quite a legacy, but was a very interesting character and sort of behind the scenes, out of the spotlight, wasn't he? Corey, he's a favorite character of yours.
Yeah. So, well, I'll tell you. So the early part of the episode talked about the origin of the idea of continental drift before people really understood, how it was the continents could move. So there were people starting with Ortelius who looked at the map of the world and noticed that, hey, the coastlines, especially the coastline of South America and the coastline of Africa, they're very similar shapes. And if you kind of cut out the continents and you do a little puzzle shaping with them, they all fit together pretty nicely. And I felt a personal connection to that because I remember doing that experiment in second grade, where my teacher made me cut out all the continents and see if they fit together. So I mean, Ortelius is generally regarded as the first person to make a real global map of the world, but also, interestingly, and this is in the 16th century, the first person to notice these similarities of continental shapes and to speculate that maybe they all started out together and somehow moved apart. But Ortelius, talk about keeping your head down. Ortelius was not a guy who was out to create great controversy. In fact, here I think I have this here. The epitaph on his tombstone. It's in Latin, and I won't torture you with my bad Latin, I'll just read the English translation. The inscription on his tombstone is, "Served quietly, without accusation, wife or children." So, this was not a guy. He was not a troublemaker. He was a man in good standing at the church. He was interested in cartography really for the sake of just understanding cartography, but he had this incredible insight. And again, sometimes the process of science is very slow. He had this insight, and this is in about 1580. Then the story picks up in 1920 with Alfred Wegener, and Alfred Wegener is really subjected to ridicule. The American Society of Petroleum Engineers in 1924 convened a session specifically to roll out all the evidence of why it is absolutely impossible that the continents move and this guy is an idiot. And you think, if there's anybody who would understand the planet, it's the people who are actually, they're doing the drilling, they're looking for oil fields. These are the people who, of anybody on Earth, should have the greatest understanding of how the planet works. And yet, 1924, this is just 90 years ago, this idea was ludicrous. So, I think the story of Ortelius is an interesting example of just how long it can take for some of these ideas to kick in, and how stubborn people can be in old ways of looking at things. Really, the idea that continents move, it was never decided by the fact that things looked like they fit together. It didn't, the theory didn't gain popularity until somebody could actually show a mechanism of how it could happen. And that didn't happen until the 1960s.
Here's a question that we have: is the show does the show really truly appeal to all ages, or is it really delivering largely science for kids?
Who wants to tackle that one?
I'll tackle that one because I'm an adult, and most weeks I still learn something new. Or if it's something that I learned many, many years ago, I'm relearning it because it's not astronomy, or especially more of the other sciences it touches upon, because I haven't dealt with that in a while. I know I've heard it called Sesame Street for science, which I don't agree with. I mean, they want it to have broad appeal, and so yes, you do want it to appeal to children, but I think they've done a good job of balancing, something that a middle schooler could watch, but also someone, who's 80 can watch and appreciate. It is television, and you're trying to make it catchy, so you have to try and engage in a wider audience. And it's a challenge for them, because if you think about it, most shows are looking for a core audience that's like, they're always looking for like the 18 to 30 market, or the 25 to 40 market. But they're trying to appeal to all ages, which is a challenge, and it's not easy. So you can't get too highbrow, because you're going to abandon the future of our world, our youth. But then you also could be insulting those who are interested in science but don't have, a vast background in it. And I mean, it's something. It kind of, to me, some people are upset about it. I terribly disagree, because it's the same challenge that we have at the magazine, or I mean, Discover has at the same time. Anytime you're never going to make everybody happy, because we will constantly get comments for the magazine where one person's going, "Oh, this is too complicated, make it simpler," and another person going, "I already know this, you make me feel like an idiot," or "You make me feel dumb reading this because I already know it." And so you have to find that balance, which is very difficult, and I think they've done a really good job so far of trying to find a balance.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think the science for kids aspect of it is something that the people who are saying it are probably not the target audience for the episodes, because it requires a little bit of the wonder that people feel about what's going on in the cosmos, as well as being able to enjoy what's going on, and probably not geared strictly to the people that know everything there is to know about the cosmos, however many of those are out there, but it's geared to getting people involved in what's going on in science and in cosmology and astronomy. And I think in that sense, I would agree with Carrie that it's doing a pretty good job of striking that balance.
Yeah, I would say, if it's if the show is evoking childhood wonder, then it's doing the right thing. I was struck by a couple things that Marie Tharp mentioned in her autobiography. That she said that the single most important thing for the acceptance of continental drift and plate tectonics, it was not any of these papers. It was that Jacques Cousteau did a mission to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and filmed it and showed it on TV. And that it wasn't just the general public; it was actually her colleagues. It was the other geologists and oceanographers and geophysicists who looked at this. And when they actually saw what the Mid-Atlantic Ridge looked like, and that it really looked like a mountain range underwater, there really was this huge rift in it. That was a huge turning point. And another big turning point for her, she said, was when National Geographic started publishing her maps, where you could really see the incredible texture and the incredible landscape of the ocean floor. And again, the impact was not just in the sort of the lay public. This really helped turn the tide in the scientific community. So I think the idea that sort of big, colorful, and kind of wonder-driven explanations are necessarily dumbing down the science. That not only misses the point. I think it actually I think it actually tells the wrong lesson about how people learn and how people think. Because the idea that that scientists are purely rational people who don't need to be spoken to in emotional terms, who don't need to be spoken to in visual terms, who don't need to participate in the wonder, that is not who scientists are. Scientists, some of my favorite scientists are the people who are themselves basically they're like big kids. And I think to me that's the most wonderful thing about the scientific mindset, is that they're the people who have never stopped just being amazed by the world that we live in.
Let's turn to maybe one or two last questions if we can. Here's one. Neil Tyson said that primates developed and I'm not talking about any of the four of us necessarily, developed the opposable thumb to help grab tree branches and swing through them. But didn't it develop after we started walking upright, as we started learning to make and use tools? Well, yeah, I think it was. Living in the trees was crucially important. Now I'm no expert, but as I understand it, that was the driving factor, as it was for stereoscopic vision as well. Because if you had good depth perception, you tended not to fall as much and die. But what do you think, guys?
Well, yeah, there's a question of opposable versus fully opposable thumbs, because there's a sort of a partially opposable thumb that's shared among many primates, and there's the fully opposable thumb, which is a uniquely human trait. My objection to the way human evolution was depicted in Cosmos was not so much that detail, which I think is a somewhat ambiguous detail, but I think the whole idea of how humans evolved to walk upright, and how we came to have this whole physiology, including the opposable thumb. Boy, you walk into a meeting of anthropologists, and there'll be fist fights over these things. There really is no consensus. And again, I think that to me that's kind of exciting, is that we don't even really understand where we came from. It's like it's a very humbling moment that we know incredible things about the universe, and yet when you really drill down to the details of well, okay, so we walk on two legs. Why do we do that? And we have these thumbs. Why do we have that? The answer is we've got a lot of interesting theories, but we really don't know.
Well, that's great, thank you. And I hate to say it, but time has snuck up on us and we're out of time. But thanks to all of you for joining me today. It's been great as always. Corey, thanks a million. Terrific as always. Carrie, thank you so much for your insights. Rich, Fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt.
And Dave, thank you.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Corey. That is all the time that we have. Thanks to all of our panelists, and special thanks again to Celestron. We're very appreciative of their sponsorship of this Google Hangout, as always. And we'll be back next week to discuss the 8th episode, which was going to be the 7th episode of Cosmos, but now it's the 8th episode of Cosmos, titled The Electric Boy. We'll see you all then, and thanks so much for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your week in the cosmos.